Imagine being so excited to come to America and you get your dream job, you meet a man, you guys fall in love, only for him to be the reason for your downfall. Hey, hi, hello, my name is Kinsey. I'm so happy to have you here. If you are new here, hey, hi, hello, my name is Kinsey. If you are coming back, thank you so much for coming back. I have quite the case for you today. But before we get into today's case, I did just want to have a little disclaimer that I mean absolutely no harm or disrespect to anyone that I talk about in the video. This is strictly for advocacy for the victims and their families and to bring more attention to this case. This case that we are talking about today is a little bit more well known. I couldn't really find any disclaimers to go on. However, there will be talks of dismemberment. So if anything like that bothers you, I completely understand. You can exit out of the video now and I will see you in the next one. So the reason that I wanted to cover this case was this actually was the first case ever solved with forensic evidence. And we'll kind of get into how the forensic testing and stuff was done, but this was the very first case known to use forensic DNA to help solve the murder. All of that being said, let's get into today's case. Today's case covers Helle Crafts. So Helle Crafts was born in Denmark in 1947. Her birth name was Helena Lornik Nielsen. Like I said, she was born in Denmark. However, because she was born in 47, there wasn't a whole lot of information that I could find on her childhood. It's a very hard case to research because it was so old. There is a lot of information about Richard Crafts, who was Helle's husband. I could find an abundance of information on him, but not so much on Helena, which was very tragic considering the fact that she was the victim and not the suspect. But the fact that there's more information on the suspect than there is the actual victim in this case is beyond frustrating. It was a really frustrating one to research, but like I said, this was the first one that used forensic evidence despite having an actual body. Helle and Richard actually got married in 1975. I believe that they met just a little while before that because Richard was a pilot and Helena was a flight attendant. So one and the same, they're in the same world, they have the same kind of schedule, that type of thing. A very, very cute love story, honestly. You both are super interested in flying, so you meet, the love of your life on a plane. What more could you ask for, really? So let's kind of talk about Richard for a second, who was Helle's husband. He was born in 1941 in Connecticut, so they actually did go on to live in his home state. I couldn't find a whole lot about Richard's childhood. I could just find out that he was born in Connecticut in 1941 and that he went on to become a pilot later on. Like I had mentioned, that's kind of how him and Helle met. So kind of getting all of that out of the way because like I said, they were both born in the 40s. There's not Snapchat, there's not Facebook, there's not a whole lot of information to be found on cases that are that old because there's no way to actually report about the childhood. Helle and Richard actually got married in 1975, like I had mentioned. They settled down in Newtown, Connecticut and gave birth to 3 beautiful children. Their names were Christina, Thomas, and Andrew Crafts. Like I said, they were Richard and Helle's children together. No one had come into this marriage with previous children or a previous relationship. So Helle actually continued to be a flight attendant, even though they did have the 3 children. She worked as a flight attendant while also raising their children. And of course, Richard stayed as a pilot. In 1986, Helle started getting a gut feeling, call it mother's intuition. I know you all know what that feeling feels like when there's something at the pit of your stomach basically telling you red flag, red flag, red flag, something is going on here. And Helle was a very intelligent woman, so she trusted her gut and actually confronted Richard about, hey, I think you're having an affair. And of course, I'm sure this did not go over well. I'm sure this was quite the argument that they had, but we don't know what happened behind closed doors. So Helle actually confronts Richard because Richard was known as being a womanizer, which is just disgusting. So upon Helle confronting Richard about this affair that she thought he was having, of course, he got angry, and actually after this, Helle met with a divorce attorney. So in addition to meeting with the divorce attorney, Helle actually hired a private investigator to kind of snoop on her husband to see, she wanted that pit in her stomach that she was feeling, she wanted it to be justified. Honestly, I cannot at all blame her for this, because if I had 3 children with somebody and I suspected them of cheating on me and I confronted them about it, gave them a chance, to talk about it with me, gave them the opportunity to kind of, work it out and be like, okay, why are you unsatisfied? Why are you not happy? Like, let's be adults. Let's talk about this. And they refuse to do it and just quick to anger. I would probably do the same thing, especially with him being a pilot. Like, he's flying to all these different countries, meeting all of these women, like, come on. So like I mentioned, Helle hired the private investigator named Kevin Mayo. So Kevin's out doing his little investigative thing. Like, I literally have it in my head of, like, it's the classic scene in, like, every investigation story where, like, there's the 2 guys sitting in the cop car with their coffee and they've got, like, the extra long camera. I can just imagine him doing that. So he's investigating. He's doing his private investigator thing. And he actually sees Richard kissing another flight attendant outside of her house in New Jersey. So based on my research, I'm not entirely sure if Helle actually received this photo that Kevin got. I'm assuming that she did, because leading up to her disappearance, she kind of was starting to get very weary, and she was like, listen, she, like, literally looked at her friends and family and was like, if something happens to me, it's not an accident. So I'm kind of assuming that she started to find out about, obviously she already knew that there was an affair brewing, but, like, once it was kind of confirmed, I think she just kind of held it to herself. But, of course, she had already confronted Richard about her suspecting him being involved in an affair. So that's obviously going to throw up red flags to him if he is hiding something. So kind of safe to assume that even if she did know, she probably didn't say anything, because she probably was building a case more and more against him. However, like I said, I couldn't find information on if this photo of him kissing this flight attendant was actually given to her. Fast forward to November 18th, 1986. So Helena had just arrived back in Connecticut from a trip that she had just taken to Germany. So she was the flight attendant on the flight from Germany. She had done it most of the weekend. So if you're not aware how, like, flight attendant schedules work, like, you might be on for a whole weekend, but then you're off for a whole week. It's very alternated. It's not like a set schedule where you go on the plane at 9 in the morning and then you're off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's very roller coastery. I know this because I was very interested in being a flight attendant at one point in my life, so I kind of looked up the schedule, the routine, and everything like that. Some flight attendants actually work for 2 months straight and then they're off for 2 months straight. It kind of varies back and forth, but they always are tending to go on these long flights. Say you start at Connecticut, so Helena would have started at Connecticut, flew to Germany, and there's no telling how many stops were in between if it was a non-stop flight, which is very unlikely. But if she was in Connecticut and had, like, 3 connecting flights to Connecticut to Germany, and you had some connecting flights in between, she would be on that one plane and most likely going to the other plane as well, unless that other plane already had flight attendants on it. It's a very weird flow, like, workflow that they have, and it varies from airline to airline. And most airlines connect to each other. So if you're on a Delta flight, you're going to probably connect to a Delta flight. If you're on an Allegiant airline, you're going to connect to an Allegiant airline, or you're just going to fly nonstop with Allegiant. She had this long flight from Germany, and her friends actually took her from the airport back to her house in Newtown, Connecticut. So this was the last known sighting of Helle, was when her friends had dropped her off at her home on the night of November 18th, 1986. This was the last time she was ever seen. So that night there was a snowstorm that hit, and this was like a very, very strong, heavy snowstorm. If you've ever been to Connecticut, they have crazy weather up there. So when I say snowstorm, I mean like inches of snow was falling on the ground. The morning of November 19th, Richard actually told their 3 children that he was taking Helle to her sister's house in Westport, Connecticut, which was roughly about 19 miles, so depending on traffic, anywhere between a 30 to 45 minute drive. The logic in this portion of the case makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. So like I said, Richard stated that he was taking Helle to her sister's house in Westport, and he shows up to her sister's house without her. So to me that makes no sense, because if you're trying to build an alibi, build a story, why would you say that you're taking Helle to her sister's house and then you don't even show up with her at the house? Like, it makes no sense, right? So that part was very confusing to me when I was, like, researching this case. I was like, why would you even go? Like, you're just gonna build a hole in your story at that point. Like, not to say that, like, he shouldn't have gone, but, like, in my mind, if that's, like, the whole purpose of it, and you're wanting to use that as your story, wouldn't you just go somewhere else and say that's where you went? I don't know. The logic, I'm not a murderer, because I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand the logic of saying you're gonna do something, and then you do it to, like, have a story to back up what you say you're doing, and then it actually throws your story off. Regardless, Richard comes back home. Of course, like I said, Helle was not with him at this point. We'll get into what happened to her in a second, but she was not with him at this point. He comes back home, and from this point, he starts telling, like, a bunch of different stories about where she is. So the three main stories that Richard kind of stuck to when asked about where Helle was that she was visiting her mother in Denmark, that she was with a friend on, like, a holiday trip, and then the last one is that he just didn't know where she was. Just didn't know where his wife was. Like, this guy, like, thinking through this, his story was so flawed. Like, he couldn't stick to one story. It was just unraveling before him. He was telling one person one thing, telling another person another thing, couldn't keep it straight, and, like, the friends started being like, what the heck? Like, this guy something's wrong here. Because, like I said, he was telling, like, three different people, three different stories, and anytime anyone would come and ask, it was a different story each time. Like, it was never consistent. At this point, it's throwing up red flags to all of Helle's friends, and they're kind of like, what the heck is this guy doing? Like, what is he on about? Like, something isn't right here. I'm sure they started to get that gut feeling that I had mentioned earlier. I'm sure when they were getting told these stories, they were kind of like, something about that just isn't sitting right with me. And rightfully so, because, like I said, Helle was very transparent about Richard's temper, and all of her friends knew that he had a violent temper. So at this point, you know, they're all aware that he's a very violent man. They haven't seen her. They have no idea where she is. They're all kind of like, what the heck? Where is she at? Richard's not giving them anything. He's giving them three different stories, so no one knows where the heck she is. So at this point, like I said, red flags are throwing up for all of the people close to Helle. In the increasingness of the concern that Helle's friends actually started showing, so prior to this, Helle had actually mentioned that if something had happened to her, that it wasn't an accident, that they needed to be concerned, they needed to keep looking. Like, if she was gone, if she disappeared, something had happened to her, and the fact that she was aware of this is so heartbreaking. She was so scared for her life that she felt the need to tell her friends, hey, if something happens to me, it's not an accident. Like, keep looking for me, keep looking for me, keep looking for me. Imagine the amount of fear that you would have to have inside of you to think that you were going to die. Because a lot of these cases that we talk about, these people don't know what's going to happen to them. They are living their life per normal. There's nothing, no red flags. They don't have very much that they're, like, worried about. But imagine having that gut-wrenching feeling of, like, if I disappear, just know it wasn't an accident. Like, knowing that that's your fate. It breaks my heart. Like, I cannot even fathom knowing what that would feel like. Knowing that you're so terrified of your husband that you're telling people, like, if I disappear, please don't stop looking for me. Please don't stop searching for me. It was not an accident. So one of the craziest things about this case was Richard was actually a volunteer police officer. Let me say that again. Richard was a volunteer police officer. So he was very well known by the police department in Newtown because he was a volunteer police officer, and that is insane to me. So because he was well known by law enforcement, can you guess what happened? I'm sure you can't. The case was actually dismissed. They didn't investigate, they didn't do anything because they were sure Helle was going to return. I mean, why would they suspect a fellow officer? They have an oath to protect the city, to protect the people. It's not going to be another officer. And like I said, this was the 80s. This was like the peak of crime, but like people weren't as weary about others as we are nowadays. So like if something comes up now, it's like immediate red flag. Like, let's investigate everyone. In a hypothetical world, that's how it's supposed to be. That is not always the case, as we know. However, that is how it's supposed to go. Like, whenever a missing person kind of comes up, they immediately start investigating. They start looking at the husband. It's always the spouse that they look at first nowadays. But at this point, you know, like I said, he was a volunteer police officer. He wasn't throwing up red flags. He was the concerned husband. He just wanted his wife back home. He has 3 children. Like, she's left him with these 3 kids to take care of by himself. Like, what a witch, right? Like I had mentioned, all of her friends were super concerned about where she was, but none of them actually reported her missing because they didn't know if Richard was telling the truth or if he was not. But on December 1st, the private investigator that Helle had actually hired to investigate her husband reported her missing because he hadn't heard from his client in weeks. At this point, it had been almost 2-3 weeks that he hadn't heard from her. He knew what mission he was on. He started to get worried, immediately throwing up red flags that I think he's involved. Like, I found this information out about him, which this was kind of what led me to believe that maybe he did turn over the evidence and Richard maybe found out that she knew or something like that and had to get rid of the evidence as quick as possible. So Kevin was very concerned about where Helle was. Like, he was like, I don't know what's happening. He tried multiple times to take it to the local police department and they would not do anything. So eventually he's like, you know what? Screw this, and took it to the state police. The state police actually did end up taking the case on and they started doing an investigation. So on December 1st is when all of this transpired. Fast forward to 25 days later, so the 26th of December, which is one day after Christmas, Richard was vacationing with his children down in Florida. And while he was gone, the investigators are like, ooh, we gotta go check this house out. Like, while we've got a chance, like, let's go. So they get their warrant, they get everything ready, and they go investigate this house. And what they find in the house is absolutely insane. Upon their initial investigation of the home, the investigators found that in the master bedroom there was a giant square of the carpet missing. They believe that this carpet piece that was actually cut out of the carpet in the master bedroom was a blood stain because the nanny had actually recalled there being like a big dark grapefruit sized stain in the carpet, and then when she had come back, that piece of the carpet was just gone. In addition to the missing carpet piece they had found, there was also a blood smear on the side of the mattress. And the forensic investigation was actually led by Henry Lee. And if you follow true crime, I'm sure you know who Henry Lee is. He is actually the lead forensic investigators on a lot of the big cases. John Benet Ramsey, O.J. Simpson, the Helle Crafts murder, aka the case we're talking about today. He's been the forensic investigator on a lot of these big name cases. So the fact that he was on this case as well is very vital because of the amount of knowledge that he had. After this case, he actually became the public safety director for the state of Connecticut. Like, this man was on it. So while the investigators are searching this house, like I said, red flags are popping up everywhere. Like, there's a missing carpet piece. The nanny said that it was blood. Like, they're like, okay, where is Helle? Like, at first, you know, they're like, oh, maybe she did just run away or something like that. But now that they've found, like, blood evidence, they're like, okay, what the heck is going on? Like, where is this woman? What is happening? What did he do? Like, what is going on? So they actually started looking at Richard's credit card statements, and what they had found on his credit card statements was absolutely mind-boggling. Upon the investigation of the house and all of the blood smears and police kind of being like, okay, something's wrong, something's not right here. They took a further deep dive into Richard's credit card statements, which actually showed a bunch of weird purchases around the time that Helle disappeared. So there was an upright freezer, which is one of those deep stand-in freezers. They could not find evidence of this freezer anywhere at the house, so they were kind of like, that's weird, why would you buy a freezer and it not be at your home? Like, a lot of people buy these freezers. Like, I personally have one for all of our meats and stuff, so we can use the freezer that's in the house, like built into the fridge, for like smaller things like rolls, things like that. But like the bigger, deeper freezers are for like those big boxes that like you don't want to take apart, like big cuts of meat, things like that. If you bought this freezer, like, where the heck is it at? So that's their first thing that they're coming up and they're like, that's suspicious, that's weird. He had also bought new sheets, new comforter, and then he had rented a wood chipper. And I'm not smiling because he rented a wood chipper. It's just the fact of, like, if you are using something that big to commit a murder, why would you put it on your credit card? Like, that is, like, I'm grateful that he did, because it obviously helped investigators solve this murder very quickly. But, like, this guy is so lazy, and it almost shows how egotistical he is. Like, he literally thought he could get away with the murder of his wife and still do all of this messy ass shit. Like, are you for real? In addition to all of these other weird purchases that they were kind of like, that's weird, you're buying sheets, you bought a freezer, and you rented a wood chipper all around the same time that your wife miraculously disappeared. Like, red flags are throwing up everywhere for investigators. They're like, this is bad news bears, right? Like, they're freaking out. There's so much that they have found just within these credit card purchases that they're like, panic immediately sets in. They have already started putting together what happened. In addition to all of these weird purchases, there was a purchase of a chainsaw as well. So that's what I'm saying. Like, those red flags started popping up. Like, it's one purchase after another that all coincide with a murder. Like, these are not things that you're just randomly gonna go buy in the middle of December at that. Like, you're not gonna go buy a freezer in the middle of December. Your freezer's not gonna go out in the cold, and even if it does, if you've got it in the garage like I do, the chances of it actually, like, unfreezing all of the food that you have in it in the middle of the middle of November, like, be for real. So, like I had mentioned, that chainsaw was also purchased around the time of her disappearance. And the chainsaw was actually found in a lake. And on this chainsaw, there was hair and DNA evidence, other DNA evidence. I'm assuming like skin cells and stuff of that nature. And those pieces actually did match Helle's DNA, confirming that the chainsaw that Richard had purchased was used to kill Helle. So one of the big pieces of evidence that kind of helped build the timeline of events when Helle was last seen and kind of the purchases that Richard had made. A nearby town's resident was driving on his snowplow because, like I had mentioned, there was a giant snowstorm that was happening. Like, using a wood chipper for a snowstorm is it's very strange. I've seen it used before, but most people just use snowplows, or they use like snow blowers and things of that nature. This guy was driving through on his snowplow, and he was actually by the lake that the chainsaw was recovered in, and he told investigators that he saw a rental truck, a wood chipper, parked on the shore of the lake. Fair warning, this is about to get very gruesome and very gory, so if you are in any way, shape, or form queasy, I would recommend skipping ahead about 2 to 3 minutes. I'm going to kind of go over what happened after this tip flooded in. So like I said, that resident gave the tip of the wood chipper being parked on the side of the lake, and he actually took investigators to the location of where he had seen the wood chipper on the side of the lake. This prompted investigators to actually search the lake. In the investigation of this area of the lake, they found 3 ounces of human tissue. They had also found the crown of a 2,660 bleached blonde hairs, as well as bone chips. They had also found blood evidence, which was a O-type blood that they had found, which was consistent with what Helle's blood type was. After finding all of these pieces of evidence in the lake where the individual stated that he had seen the wood chipper the night of November 18th. The chainsaw that they found in the bottom of the lake was later confirmed to be the one that Richard had purchased. He had tried to scrub the serial number off of it, but it wasn't scrubbed off well enough, and investigators could actually find out what the serial number was, and it was confirmed to be the same chainsaw that Richard had a report of on his credit card statement of purchasing. Same brand, same model, same everything, same location, originator. This was the chainsaw that he had used to kill Helle. The series of events is a little bit cloudy at this point in the event, but police are sure that Richard did feed Helle through the wood chipper on the side of the lake the night of November 18th, but they still had a lot more work to do to figure out what had happened, what caused this, what the heck was going on. So upon further analysis of all of the evidence that they had compiled all together, including his credit card statements, what they had seen at the house when they went to investigate it, as well as the eyewitness testimony of seeing the wood chipper on the side of the lake, the police had come to the conclusion that this timeline that I'm about to give you was what had happened the night that Helle was murdered. Like I had mentioned, Helle was in West Germany on a flight attendant trip, and she had been dropped off that night. So she comes in. Like I had mentioned, she did have the private investigator. It's likely that the photo was given to her and Richard found it, and at this point goes into a fit of rage and starts planning what the hell he's going to do. How is he going to cover this up? So whenever she comes through the door, he had already pre-planned all of this out. This was a premeditated murder. He had already purchased all of the supplies, rented everything that he needed. So when she walks through the door, coming back home from her trip, ready to go to bed, he strikes her in the head twice with a blunt force object. This was consistent with the blood stain that the nanny saw that was on the carpet, which was then later cut out, and also why there would be the blood smear on the side of the bed. She probably touched her head where she was hit, fell backwards, and went to stabilize herself, and then that's when the blood smear hit the mattress. At this point, Helle was pronounced dead, so Richard then put her body into the freezer that he had purchased earlier that day to keep her body frozen. At the point of being frozen solid, Richard then took Helle out of the freezer and proceeded to dismember her body with the chainsaw that he had also purchased earlier that day. At this point, he transferred Helle's dismembered body in the vehicle with him, with the wood chipper attached to the back, and drove down to the lake. At this point, with additional scrap metal that was available to him, he started feeding her body parts in with the scrap metal into the wood chipper, feeding it into the lake. I also read in another source that he actually used the wood chipper at his house to run her remains through it. So I'm not entirely sure which series of events actually happened, if he had fed it through at the lake or if he fed it through at home and then went to the lake to shovel her remains into the lake that way. Prosecution for homicide cannot take place unless there is a body found. The wood chipper scenario in mind, there was no body to be able to be found. However, this is where forensic evidence actually came into play. So the crown that they had found in the bottom of the lake was confirmed to be Helle's through dental analysis. So it was positively confirmed to be her crown molding, and at that point the medical examiner actually did issue a death certificate for Helle, and at that point Richard was immediately arrested. Editor's note, this guy reminds me of that one guy from Harry Potter that has the licking thing. You know who I'm talking about. That's what this picture reminds me of. Okay. While building up the actual case, prosecutors needed more evidence to prove that the scenario that they had built, the timeline of events, was actually what transpired. So they actually took pig carcasses and reenacted what they believed had happened and the timeline from start to finish to confirm the theory that they had, if it was plausible or not. So with feeding these pig carcasses through the wood chipper, the way that their bones chipped up was the exact same way that they had found the bone chip piles when they had done their initial search of the lake. It was the same exact, wasn't the same exact as her bones, but like the cuts were very harsh and you could see where they chipped off. So putting them side by side, they looked very similar in terms of how they broke apart. So at this point, prosecutors felt very strongly that they knew that their timeline of events and what they had built together based on the evidence was exactly what happened. Richard's trial actually started in May of 1988 in New London, which it was actually moved to because they could not hold the trial in Newtown because the case was so well known in the town. There was so much coverage on it there that there was too much bias, so they didn't feel as if Richard was going to get a fair trial. Don't know how you think you're going to get a fair trial and it's going to go your way anyway. You put your wife through a fucking wood chipper. So this trial was actually 54 days long, and they had deliberated for a very, very long time. And on day 17 of deliberations, one single juror actually said that they weren't going to deliberate any longer. Like, they were done deliberating on this case. So the judge actually filed as a mistrial because one of the jurors was non-compliant. This led to a second trial taking place. The second trial took place in Norwalk, Connecticut. This trial actually did end in a guilty verdict in November 21st, 1989. So 3 years after he had originally murdered Helle. Based off of this guilty verdict, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Don't know why it wasn't life, but that's neither here nor there, putting him to be released in 2039. Fast forward to January of 2020. On January 30th, 2020, Richard was released from prison to a halfway house. Richard was released early because of good statutory behavior, which essentially means that because he was good in jail and committed a lot of jailhouse jobs, he was put out for early release. So he was released 19 years prior to when he should have been, meaning that he only served 31 years in prison for the murder of Helle Crafts. And that's where we are today. There has been no other acknowledgement of if Richard has committed another crime, what the motive was behind the crime, but like I said, it is kind of safe to assume with the private investigator, Helle wanting to file for divorce, that she probably had all of this evidence mounting against him, and in a fit of rage, he acted very irrationally, and it resulted in the death of Helle. The Craft children have not publicly spoken out about their father's involvement in the murder. I can only imagine how they feel. Please, please, please respect their privacy, because this is something that is this case was gruesome, to say the least. Recording this, I got choked up a couple times just because of how vile and disgusting this case was. I could never imagine doing that to another human being, and to go to sleep at night, let alone go on fucking vacation with your children, knowing that you put their mother through a fucking wood chipper. Like, are you kidding me? That is the epitome of a disgusting human being, and the fact that he got out of prison 19 years prior to when he should have is just fucked up. And that shows you that this case was not taken very seriously at all. And I genuinely believe because he did have ties to the police department, because like I said, he was working as a volunteer police officer for the police department. So it's always protect their own. That's how they have always been. That is the culture that surrounds police officer. It's protect your own, protect your own, protect your own. And I mean no disrespect when I say that, because 9 times out of 10, they do all want to protect themselves and protect each other. However, in this instance, justice was heavily unserved here. This man should have served the full 50 years. He should have been sentenced to life, in my opinion. He should not have ever had the opportunity to go out, because now he can go live the rest of his life. Even though he is almost 90 fucking years old, he can go on to live the rest of his life sitting in a house somewhere, perfectly content. And that just pisses me off, man. Really. This case is, like I said, solved and it is over. However, it's still just a very overall disgusting and gruesome case, and the fact this one really just riles me up, man. If he wanted to be with the mistress, he had the opportunity of divorce, because Helle had already met with a divorce attorney. Like, there was no reason to kill her. There's no reason to ever kill anyone, but like, you had a way out. Like, you had no justification whatsoever. And, like, why wouldn't you just take the divorce and go on? A lot of people were kind of talking about how he was okay with losing his wife, but he wasn't okay with losing his money. So, with the divorce, he would then have to pay Helle money, because she would, of course, have the 3 children. She would be taking care of them. Child support would come into play. And I don't think that that was something that he was okay with. Just overall, a very frustrating case. If you guys enjoyed, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, because like I said, YouTube does not push this content out very much because it is rather dark and depressing. Completely understand. However, these cases do need to be talked about, and red flags do need to be discussed so we can see them in people around us and identify them, and hopefully save future lives and get coverage on cases that deserve the coverage. This one was one that was covered a lot. Fun fact, there was actually a Law & Order Special Victims Unit episode, The Good Doctor, that was based around this case. I thought that was kind of interesting that they had based it off of this case. Pretty interesting. But I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week with a new case, and we will go from there. Other than that, I love you. Stay safe out there. Take care of yourself and others, and make sure that you all are great. I love you. Goodbye. I will see you next week.